Hello. So I started listening to the Lord of Spirits 100th anniversary podcast. Um, People want to join the stream, they can. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to do a commentary, so I might as well do the commentary while I listen to it, because I'm going to end up having to do a commentary anyway. And this is about 11 minutes in. There's a link in the description. So you guys may find, I thought this was a good place to start doing the commentary.
Last time, right? And we're gonna. This is our want. We went backwards last time, right? We sort of worked our way back to the Stone Age. So we'll recap it forwards.
That's nice.
So not only will this be a refresher, but if anyone is confused by the last episode, maybe this will help. Who knows?
Yeah.
So we started out talking about talking about humans in hunter-gatherer societies having maintained sort of a conception of the one God who created everything.
Yep.
Although even within that, you start to see some drift in that one God starts to become a sky god. And once you start getting a sky god, then you're on your way.
It's a sky daddy.
Yeah, exactly. The flying spaghetti monster. It's spaghetti, the hunter-gatherer. They found it in the wild.
The wet bread, wet bread monster.
No, that you're well on your way to having gods of other things. Once you have a god that you associate as particularly a sky god.
Yeah.
Right? So there's already drift happening, but we don't have what would later come to be called paganism yet.
Right.
And we talked about how paganism as such, the kind of paganism that we find being pretty ubiquitous in the ancient world, you find beginning and growing out of the Neolithic Revolution. As people move from hunter-gatherer to agrarian, they start domesticating plants and animals. They start living in one place, growing food. This is where you begin to see, first, you see the sort of sky father, earth mother kind of paradigm emerge. And then as life in settlement starts, you start seeing gods of this, that, and the other. Then you start to see sacrifices happening in distinct sacred places, right? Rather than people stopping and building altars as they travel.
Yeah, there's like shrines,
right?
Temples, tabernacles. Well, not
people take pilgrimages to, and then become the sites of settlements, permanent settlements. You have still within it, you have the phenomenon of nomadism and people who are living nomadically. Still, when you look at their religion, it's still closer to those earlier roots, right? Which, of course, we as Christians believe is at least closer to the truth. And we talked about how there's also a thread going through here of people who are worshiping the true God, right? And we see that spelled out, not just in terms of from Moses on, but even in Genesis, and not just Abraham. Abraham encounters Melchizedek, who is someone living in a pagan society, but who's still worshiping the true God.
Which, how does that work? But it just does. That's all.
God deserves a remnant.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so then we talked about the shifts in the mid-first millennium BC, that's referred to as the Axial Age, these sort of shifts that happen really across the world, shifts that happen both within paganism, from sort of the de rigueur paganism of the day, to paganisms that are in various ways more refined.
Yeah, I think like the way that I kind of works out in my head is it's sort of intellectualizing on some level. You know, you start getting doctrines and texts and this kind of thing to express, as you said, more refined, to express a more kind of verbal, I think, form of religion.
Right, because there is that move to a focus on texts, a more intense focus on text, a rise in literacy rates, and that does reshape religious practice.
Yeah.
We didn't get into this last time because it wasn't strictly on topic, but something very similar happens in terms of the shift of religion within Europe when the Reformation happens and you have the printing press. You have another huge rise in literacy rates. That you again have religion becoming more text-focused and more intellectualized as a result.
And I would say we have a similar shift actually happening because of the internet. Hey, Sandy. Right.
So that's something that happens. But that happened not only within paganism, but as we talked about, that happened within Judaism. And that's part of what produces what we call Second Temple Judaism with the synagogue system.
So this is where we're going to have to start diverging, right? So their view is very different from, and I mean, so Mutatis and Mutandis, right? Everything staying the same, right? the hello, my friend Khezi.
Jacob?
Are you playing music for your kid in the car? I think he could have heard me. Okay. So this is so one of the reasons I get along with Father Stephen is because we have this similar idea regarding God does not change. Obviously, God does not change. So the question becomes, if God does not change, why and how does religion change? And some modernists would answer that by saying, well, obviously, there's no God because religions change. There are different religions, right? That's not how Judaism answers that question. Ani havaya lo shaniti. I am the Lord, I have not changed. How Judaism answers the question is, God does not change, but we change. We are finite, we are human. And in fact, that is the whole point of us being finite and being human and being in time, is a recognition of God. And so God's relationship to us, the unchanging God's, yes, the Rock of Ages, Tur Olamim, the relationship that God has to us is a reflection of the fact that we are different and he is not. And since he is perfect in every way, his relationship with each human being is as perfect as it can be. Hello, Rabbi Chezi.
Hello, sir. I'm going to try again. Give me a moment for a second. You can keep on talking.
Okay. So we believe that God, before he created the world, was aware of how each human, before he even created each human, would be deficient, would be incapable of a perfect relationship with God. And he arranged humanity, he arranged creation in the perfect way possible to achieve that wonderful thing, that wonderful day to come, which is when God's kingdom shall reign on earth as it does in heaven, right? And so the God of Israel is the God of history. He is the God who created the world and at the very beginning knew what would be at the end of it. And at every point, he did that which is best in order to deal with the fact of our imperfections, which in fact he also created, right? And I mean, this is all over the Jewish liturgy. And like today was Yom Kippur. Like the liturgy is really, I mean, and I would say the Bible has been explaining this from the very beginning, right? Okay. That is so Father Stephen in some aspects agrees with that framing. At the same time, and that's what they're trying to explain in this 100th episode. At the same time, it wildly diverges from the Jewish teachings. Frankly, I would say because of the mistakes of Christianity. And so let's keep on listening.
With a renewed focus on the text, particularly of the Torah, but then of the other Hebrew scriptures, and then ultimately it's continued into Christianity. Right. And so we talked about... I
would say it doesn't. So Judaism has been working towards the coming of the Messiah since its very beginning. Genesis, right? And like for example, he kind of has... They're going to start off with Enosh, right? With not Enoch, Enosh, Enosh.
Enosh, as we say, Az Huchal Likro B'Shem Hashem. That's when they started using God's name. There's different interpretations. If Huchal is, that's when they be getting venerating God, or is that from Chilul? Is that when the names of God actually started being desecrated?
So this is when I was like, okay, I'm definitely gonna have to do a commentary on this, because I didn't like, while I was listening to him, I'm like, is he gonna do the Huchal? Is he gonna do the Huchal? And at least as far as I have heard so far, he has not actually mentioned Huchal and the double reading there, and they seem to be veering off in a different way. And it's like, okay, yeah, they need to they need to move on. And Elijah says, glad you stopped talking about anti-Semitism in Israel and started talking about the real topic of this channel, Christianity. Thank you, Elijah. Okay, I am going to continue letting them go off the wrong way.
About sort of those shifts, but that within those shifts, there's this overarching continuity.
Right.
So to start out tonight, we want to focus in a little bit.
You guys
on
hear this, right?
Those shifts happening.
I don't know if I have to display it. There's nothing really on screen, but okay, I'm going to display it on screen. You guys tell me if you were able to hear it while they weren't on screen.
Within Judaism.
Yeah.
The way we see what we were talking about last time. Last time we were talking mainly about the pagan world and with broad strokes. Now we're going to focus in on how we see this reflected, especially in the scriptures, but also within Israelite religion, Judaism, and Christianity.
Okay.
So
buckle up, everybody. We're doing another massive sweep of thousands. I thought about this a little bit earlier today because I went into Chicago and I went to what is now called the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures. But until a year and a half ago, it was called the Oriental Institute. And I mean, I was looking at artifacts that were literally like 6,000 to 8,000 years old in some cases, or 4,000 to 6,000. I don't know, but I mean, it was, like I could hear Carl Sagan in my head saying billions and billions.
It's not that old.
It's not that old. It's not that old. But it's that sort of level of historical scale that you just can't, you just really can't imagine.
Yeah. And yet they're human artifacts.
And I have to say, they don't believe in Omphalos. Christians generally don't believe in Omphalos. Judaism, or Orthodox Judaism, very explicitly believes in Omphalos, which is a very different way of looking at the age of the earth.
Human artifacts. It was
humans
crazy.
like us who made them. Yeah.
Crazy. It was
aliens.
Wild to see. Like the newest stuff in there was from, I don't know, like AD 800 or something like that. But the vast majority and I have to say to everybody, by the way, since I'm mentioning this place, if you're in Chicago, you should check out this museum because it's basically a Lord of Spirits museum. I mean, it kind of is. Have you ever been to it, Father?
I have not been there.
Oh, you should totally. I mean, and it's not big either. Like you can look at all at a fairly leisurely pace within the space of just a couple hours. But a lot of the cultures that we talk about on this show are represented in that museum. So if you're in Chicago, people, go have a look. And actually, having listened to the show, you will find it to be a rather rich experience versus just walking in there cold without any talk of things like a Lamassu, which they have one.
Yes.
I did send you a photo of me standing in front of that thing.
Standing in front of, yeah.
Yes.
Fortunately, you weren't posed in a goofy way.
No, I don't. Yeah. I mean, I was standing literally in the front of an image of someone else's lesser gods. So, yeah, no goofy poses.
Also, if you're in Chicago, you should go and get muffins from Mindy's Bakery.
Oh, duly noted.
I don't think it's kosher.
Muffins from Mindy's.
Yeah. So these shifts, as we said, are not just present out there in the pagan world, but they're present within Judaism and then Christianity. And yet, right, and this is why we're focusing here, we're going to say there's a continuity, right? A very real and strict continuity
That's pretty daring.
From
See, this is the important part, because I do agree with him that there is there needs to be a continuity within the true religion. I would disagree with him that Christianity is part of that, and I think even where he starts with Enosh is part of not understanding the continuity the way that Judaism does.
Genesis through Revelation. And
Yeah.
I would just say, Jacob, that this is obviously all about the Toledot, right? Understanding sort of like the history, understanding how these names and these concepts of God continue, and just a point which we mentioned in the past, but about the ever the constant God and the changing religion, or at least the changing in perception with our practice of religion. Famously, again, we see this, right, when Moses meets God at the burning bush, right? I have introduced myself to the forefathers under the guise of El Shaddai, and I'm introducing myself to you under the Tetragrammaton, right? So now it's the same God, but clearly there's a phase shift over here, and that is constantly going to keep on happening as it grows. Now that's opening up a slippery slope, saying like, well, I could feed Jesus into there and being like, well, that's like the next stage, but regardless, it's not so strange to see the relationship change as God exposes himself more as we return.
Correct. The question becomes, what is a legitimate understanding of that? And I would say a legitimate and a Jewish understanding acknowledges that God is outside of time, has always known that what the Ezahu Chacham Haroeh et Hanolad, God from the very beginning knew precisely how everything would in fact happen, and planned for it well, right?
Well,
God was not shocked in any way by anything.
So yes, I mean, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole about like the Manus Friedman like controversy of God needing, and like as far as free will goes, and like his own limitations on himself. However, also mentioned in the past, but we've read it yesterday in the 10 Martyrs, right? So obviously there's the chilling case of Ben Tradion, right, where they peel his skin. And when they get to the point of the tefillin, because the emperor's daughter wants his skin, and when they get to the point of the tefillin, he yells out, he screams, and the angels call out to God and they say, "Is this Torah and is this its reward?" And God responds to them. It's nicer in Yom Kippur Daven because it's a little more poetic than the Midrash, the way it's written, but silence. If you say one more word, I'm gonna turn the whole earth into water again. I'll bring back the destruction. And the interpretation is like, I've already seen this 2,000 years ago, because that relates to God creating the Torah 2,000 years before and looking at the Torah, and that's the blueprint of the world. But in that sense, which is God, like you said, Jacob, is aware of all this already. However, he's telling the angels to be silent because they can't handle the tension of God is still interested to see it play out. I know the Rabbi Tadron and I know the Rabbi Akiva I created. Will they actually manifest through free will one of the timelines that I foresaw? And if they do so, that's sort of what I want to see happen right now. But that is, again, through the Midrash, we're pointing out that God is already aware of all the territory, but
you're already falling into open theism category. Sorry.
All right, we'll scale it back.
It's not that God foresaw various possibilities and he doesn't know which one. I categorically disagree with that.
But you're saying I don't know. I think, but like God doesn't know. We don't know what that term means. That goes back to, like I said, the Manus Freedom thing. Like, is he limiting himself to allow for free will?
No. Look, God knew what the result of our free will would be before he created us. God knew the result of our free will before he created us. There's no surprising God.
Jacob, you are right that there's no surprising God, but there's a sense where it's happening together with him. So we'll use an example just because it's relevant to the break fast, the holiday we had. So if my wife is in the kitchen working and my son is running around the kitchen and sort of getting in her way, right? That's like us flailing around sort of in front of God. Now, my wife goes to my son and says, "You know what? You could help me peel the potatoes right now." Now, does she need him to peel the potatoes? No. But once he agreed and he took on the responsibility, now he's part of the potato making team. And now she's relying on him to make the meal. And in that sense, like, does she need him to make the potatoes? No. But he's invited to participate. And now once he's participating in the potato making, he's part of the system. And she's allowing him to partake in that. And she is now depending on him to peel those potatoes.
Okay, okay, I don't understand why you're making this point.
The analogy is that the free will that God has seen or that he's aware of, nevertheless, he is allowing us to fully participate in it. So he might be aware of
yes,
the outcome. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, if you understand.
We are compatibilists. We believe that our free will is compatible with God's complete knowledge, but God's knowledge is complete.
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay. And from the very beginning, he knew exactly what would be at the end, and which is why the Torah, from the very beginning, has included everything necessary all the way to the end.
Correct.
And that's why the Torah does not change. Okay.
And we could interpret that already in the word bara, from Bereshit bara. There was an intention and there's an end goal, and we are living out from that point until the eschaton.
Correct. That everything was laid out from the very beginning. And yes, we have free will. And I really like Doug Wilson. I heard him first say it this way, but I really liked it. God draws straight with crooked lines, because just as you have, I was actually going to pull up this. It's an Ashkenazi piyut for Yom Kippur, but I just loved it so much. I figured I would go ahead and read it. I guess I could even sing it. Ki anu amecha ve'ata Elokeinu, anu vanecha ve'ata avinu, anu avadecha ve'ata Adonenu. The parts that I really liked, anu charmecha ve'ata notrenu, anu peulatecha ve'ata yotzrenu, anu rayatecha ve'ata dodenu, anu
dodenu.
What?
I was just repeating with you.
Yeah. And then there was also this other part. So what I went to Chabad, and unlike what I usually do, I actually just I I followed along with the with their things, and so I saw a lot of stuff that I didn't really know from before. And one of the parts they had was um, it talks about zechuchit biyad. Do you know the part I'm talking about? How do you spell
Ken anachnu
zechuchit?
beyadcha. Zayin, vav, chaf. No, sorry. Zayin, chaf, vav, chaf, yud, taf.
Oops. Zechuchit.
Ken anachnu beyadcha kesuchit ata hamemazeg umemozeg.
Yeah, that
You are the glass. Yes.
here I found it. Yeah, ki hine
Ken anachnu beyadcha.
chomer b'yad yotzer. Here, I'll read it in English. Like clay in the hand of the potter, if he wills, he can expand it. If he wills, he can contract it. So too are we in your hand, preserver of kindliness. Heed the covenant and not the accuser. Like stone in the hand of the mason, if he wills, he holds it in position. If he wills, he smashes it. So too are we in your hands, causer of life and death. Heed, excuse me, the covenant and not the accuser.
Bless you.
Like iron in the hand of the smith. If he wills, he puts it into the fire. If he wills, he removes it. So too are we in your hand, supporter of the poor and destitute. Heed the covenant and not the accuser. Kihine kahege biyad hamalach. Like the rudder in the hand of a seaman. If he wills, he holds it. If he wills, he lets it go. So too are we in your hand, Almighty, who is good and pardons. Heed the covenant and not the accuser. Like glass in the hand of the glazier. If he wills, he shapes it. If he wills, he dissolves it. So too are we in your hand, absolver of intentional and unintentional sin. Heed the covenant and not the accuser. Like a tapestry in the hand of an embroiderer. If he wills, he makes it straight. If he wills, he makes it crooked. So too are we in your hand, jealous and vengeful, Almighty. Heed the covenant and not the accuser. Like silver in the hand of the refiner. If he wills, he adulterates it. If he wills, he keeps it pure. So too are we in your hand, who prepares a cure for our wounds. Heed the covenant and not the accuser. And all of this is actually very poetic. And so Hebrew poetry is alliterative, and it's a beautiful poem in the Hebrew. But
So is the Chol Aminim, also very beautiful. Another one of the tunes. I mean, again, that's why it's very important to have a very good cantor. Sometimes people could err, and it's a 6-hour prayer, so you want to make sure you have someone keeping that that congregation moving.
Cantors are really good. Cantors are really expensive.
Yes, but many synagogues, shell out the big bucks for that.
Yeah, I went on Erev Rosh Hashanah. I went to see one of my rabbanim from Jerusalem was here for Rosh Hashanah, and it was a tiny minyan. Like there were not more than 50 people in the room. They sold the Tefilat HaParnasah. They did an auction. How much do you think it went for? This is just Erev Yom Kippur. Erev, not Erev Yom Kippur, Erev Rosh Hashanah. $27,000.
My God.
Just
he could have kept the money and he would have the parnasah.
just Petichat HaEchal. It was like, oh, okay, this is the type of minion this is. I mean, whatever. But yeah, I was surprised it went for 27,000. But I mean, Maftir Yonah, I think in places, I mean, it's not that unusual for it to go for over 50,000, right?
Again, like in many shuls, synagogues in Israel, they sort of stopped doing those auctions, or they keep it fairly low.
Really? Okay. Because yeah,
Yeah.
at least in Sephardic, yeah, Sephardic shuls do auctions more than Ashkenazi do, and yeah, you certainly end up with high prices for things like a maftir yonah. Okay, back to what we were talking about though.
Yeah.
Is free will the same in Judaism and Christianity? Depends what you mean by Christianity, but
And what do you mean by free will?
But I mean, the Jewish ideas of free will versus determinism certainly have a different thrust than how a lot of people understand Paul of Tarsus.
But we're diverging a little. Like you're trying to follow this continuity line that Father Stephen DeYoung is proposing right now, correct?
Yeah, I think they're.
So let's jump back to this conversation, and two, just as a heads up, and no pressure, I might have to bounce off, but I'll jump back on once I drop off my kids.
Okay.
Okay, go on.
Into Christianity.
Yeah.
Right. We're not going to say these are different religions. Right.
It's one religion.
There are shifts that happen. These shifts we've been talking about are reflected in there, and so that's why we're now sort of.
And just as far as the same religion, it just, I want to just point this out. And again, we don't have to dive too deep into this, but the standing prayer, the silent prayer, which has 18 prayers, but really 19 actually, there's a whole, deep reason what that is. But whatever, the 19th prayer called Birkat HaMinim, for the longest time, that prayer, which was actually focused on the Jewish Christians, or the first iteration of that, even though it was harsh, it was still we were aware that the Jewish Christians were inside the community. And for the longest time in Judaism, while we even had an issue with the schism, we still didn't want to push people out. However, at some point, there obviously is a split. So Father Stephen DeYoung saying it's the same, at some point it diverges into something else.
Honestly, the more I look into it, the more obvious it becomes to me that it was really the Christians which made the split, and you can see that in the speeches of John Chrysostom. You can see that in the Council of Nicaea, particularly around the date of Easter. I really do think it was really the Christians which pushed themselves out mostly. Birkat HaMinim, I mean, again, like if you don't think of yourself as a sectarian, why would you care about Birkat HaMinim?
No, so you have to think about it. That's why it's a double-edged sword, because I mean, you have to think that once if I'm at that time, right, I'm a Jew believing in Jesus, right? I'm still going to the temple. I'm bringing sacrifices. It goes on 40 years later after he dies, so I'm still participating in that, and I'm going to synagogue. If I have to pray every day, and you have to look at the original language that we see in the Cairo Geniza, which is the Mushumadim v'Notzrim. Right? If I'm saying that about myself all 3 times a day, I don't want to be part of that community.
Hold on. The Cairo Geniza, it is not clear. We don't have anything older than the 1400s Meshumadim and Notzrim. It's not clear that was really an ancient thing of Birkat HaMinim. In fact, it looks like it was Laminim ul Malshinim, and I'm pretty sure Yosef says that he thinks that's what it was. But even if it was, and frankly, I thought Malshinim might be Hameshulashim, right? The one, or Meshalshim, right? But it's we just don't have that much proof of that, but we have plenty of writings about Christians telling other Christians to stop going to synagogues and enforcing them to stop going to synagogues. And frankly, I even talked to my rabbi today. I was like, we have to start letting Gentiles back into the synagogue. And it's not, I don't think from a Jewish perspective that Gentiles are not allowed into the synagogue.
Refocusing on this, when we're talking about what is the latitude, how do shifts happen? Is every shift a change? Is every change a break?
I feel like these are song lyrics you're quoting, but I'm pretty sure they're not. Like, wait, I'm never sure when you're quoting lyrics. So because you just, I mean, you speak poetically very naturally. That's what you're.
I also dig in the crates for references.
Yes,
so
yes.
People for centuries will puzzle over what I've created here. The first one of these shifts that we see reflected in Scripture is in Genesis chapter 4, verse 26.
Shavua Tov and Shana Tova, Rabbi Yosef, we were actually just talking about you. Chazi thinks that the early nusach of Birkat Haminim was mentioned in Notzrim. I don't think that's true. I don't know what I thought I said. I heard you say that you don't think that's true. Okay. But this, we're only 21 minutes in. It's a 4-hour broadcast. I was not intending on going past 12 my time.
So we're not starting in Genesis 1:1 this time, but close, a couple pages. And that's in the genealogy of Seth, one of the genealogies there in Genesis 4. Genealogies are everybody's favorite thing in the Bible. But there's this comment about Seth's son Enosh. Right. So this is as presented in the genealogy.
Now, they're starting with this, whereas if you're telling this story from a Jewish point of view, right? Actually, we would start with Genesis 1, right? And first, God decided to make the world with the name Elohim, right? The Tetragrammaton was not involved. He saw that we could not endure it. Therefore, he decided to create the world with the Tetragrammaton. That's why there's the first creation story and the second creation story. Then in the second creation story, it became clear because of the sin that we had to be thrown out of the garden, which is another cataclysm. And each generation has, as far as we're concerned, each generation has its tikkun, has its impact on the world. Again, like I said before, God draws straight with crooked lines, and he arranged all of history precisely as how he wants it to come to the final as he, knowing what, and again, like this this prayer we were looking at, Ki hinei kachomer beyad hayotzer, right? This idea of like Ki hinei ka'even beyad hamesatet beretzoto ochez uberetzoto mechatet ken anachnu biyadcha mechaye umemotet labrit habet ve'al tefen layetzer. Like stone in the hand of the mason, if he wills, he holds onto it. He beretzoto ochez, he holds it in a certain place. Uberetzoto mechatet, or he crushes it into pieces. Right? So God in it uses us as we are in the grand plan to his will. Ken anachnu biyadcha mechaye umemotet. So we are in your hands, the one who gives life and causes death. Labrit hatbet ve'al tefen liyetzer. Okay. Keep on going.
Theology, Adam's grandson.
Yeah.
Okay. says on Enosh, not Enoch. Enoch comes later. And it says that in his day, people began to call upon the name of Yahweh.
Yeah, which on its face seems kind of weird. Like, wait a minute, wasn't Adam talking to him? What?
Yeah, that's a great question, which unfortunately they didn't go into the Hebrew to explain the Jewish answer, which I think is a better one than the one they give, although the one they give is better than I think most Protestants would give.
That's talking.
Yes.
Wasn't Abel talking to him?
Yes. Yeah. So, but this is reflecting a shift. And calling upon the name of Yahweh, or as it's usually in English Bibles, calling upon the name of the Lord.
Of the Lord, yeah. But it's
always
Yahweh.
refers to worship.
Yeah.
Right. This is, over and over again in Genesis, the patriarchal narratives, he built an altar and there he called upon the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean he was just yelling the Lord's name over and over again.
Right.
He was worshiping there. So we could translate this meaningfully, that this is when people started to worship Yahweh, which again, as Father Andrew said.
And this is where he should have talked about the other translation, which he didn't.
They weren't doing that before?
Right. We know that Abel at the very least, was doing it.
Offering sacrifice.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So it seems strange that it says, and then they began to call upon the name of Yahweh.
Right.
What is it that began exactly?
So what this is talking about is a shift that happens as humanity is multiplying on the earth.
And this is where they leave the Jewish understanding, which is as huchal, right? So the word to begin, huchal, right, can be translated in two ways. The simple understanding is to begin. The other understanding is halal, to profane. So Enosh was the first to profane the name of God, right? This Maimonides explains as Chet Enosh in Hilchot Avodah Zarah, in the laws of idolatry, in his Mishneh Torah, which I usually translate as restatement of the law. I want to say chapter 1 and 2. It's towards the beginning. He explains the sin of Enosh, or Enos, as it's usually translated, actually, transliterated, which is that actually this is where people started saying, hey, God created the sun, and so the sun is a S-U-N, not S-O-N, but yes, that applies too. Therefore, it is worthy to sin, to give glory to those things which serve God, right? And that's how it became possible that people made this mistake of serving lesser gods. They instead, not basing it in the language of the Bible itself, I would say, as huchal, take it into the question of cities. There is this concept, you can't see it in the Hebrew Bible, of there being a certain corruption of man through man, right? And living in cities is part of that. But
Earth. Right. And once you have humanity multiplying and spreading out, right, then you have the beginning of religion. Before this, to throw some of our friends a bone, it was a relationship, not a religion.
We just had a bunch of evangelicals who loved us until this moment.
See, and we would say in Judaism that it's always a relationship. Yes, there is religion that God reveals, right? So that's Moshe, the religion of Israel, which was given to Moses on Mount Sinai, is a particular covenant. And there were particular covenants, the covenant of Noah, the covenant of Abraham, the covenant, right? And and this really is part of what Chazi is constantly talking about in terms of ultimately when it comes to the time of Mashiach, right? There is so in the Noahide movement, there's this whole question of Chidush Dat, right? a person is not allowed to create their own religion. That's definitely forbidden in Judaism for everyone. But to the extent that something they have inherited something, and it is a kosher something, then we don't necessarily believe that they should abandon it. And this is really part of a huge question in terms of what exactly does Judaism demand of Gentiles and Noachides.
But from
Walking
Enosh
away.
on, it's a religion, not a relationship.
Yeah.
Because it's number one, it's not direct, and number two, right? We're not talking about just there's one big family on earth, and the head of that family is leading it in the worship of God. We're talking about lots of families; they're spreading out, right? Therefore, you have individual heads of families offering sacrifices in different places. But you also have, when you go over to the genealogy of Cain, right? We've talked about that a fair amount. We're going to obliquely here touch on giants, so get obliquely excited. There are other names being called upon.
Yep.
There are other things starting to be worshipped.
Yep.
In the city that Cain built
Over there in Cain land.
And so there is now, we could now talk about religion meaningfully once we get to the generation of Enosh. That's what this is saying. There are people who are worshiping Yahweh, the true God. There are other people out there worshiping other things in different places. Right? And so we see this pattern that we referred to last time of sort of earlier pre-settled religion being preserving an earlier stage of religion.
Right.
So Abram is living in an idolatrous city.
Where they've got temples and, all that going on.
Right. You got paganism running wild. We're well post Neolithic revolution here by millennia. But notice the situation with Abram. God comes and appears to Abram in person.
Yeah, which presumably, we don't get any.
And we would say that's because Avram was able to understand what is the minimum of all understanding, is that there is one God. Like, it makes no sense. So there's a midrash that famously says, so Terach was an idol maker, and one day as a child, Abram was left alone by his father in the idol making shop, and Abram takes the hammer in the hand of the largest of the idols, and he smashes all the rest of them. And when his father comes back, he's like, "You destroyed all my work." He's like, "No. It was the big God, right? He destroyed all the smaller gods, right?" So so this midrash is pointing to, right, the obviousness that there has to be one greatest God that is above all others, and it is not worthy to worship lesser gods.
Any records, I should say, of that happening. Like there are times when it says that God speaks to Noah, right? But is it this in-person sense? I don't know. That he sees him face to face?
No.
Yeah.
No. That's
see, this is the thing. Like, God doesn't have a face, right? And despite all these Christian ideas that, like, all the Old Testament theophanies were Jesus, which makes zero sense, considering Jesus obviously doesn't seem to think of himself in that manner. But yeah.
Abram and then Moses.
Yeah.
So he's called to this idolatrous city and is called to leave that city and return to living essentially as a nomad. Not only as he spends years traversing the known world and the Fertile Crescent to get to Canaan, but then even once he's in Canaan, he doesn't go and move to a city. Lot does, and that goes badly. But
Yes.
Abram doesn't move into a city. Abraham continues to live nomadically on the land and move from place to place.
And as we've said before, like, this is one of the themes that runs through, especially the Old Testament, is this idea that the putting down roots and building cities is less than ideal. Is not the paradisaical life that was given to Adam and Eve.
Right. It may not be bad in and of itself, but it's dangerous.
Yeah. Most cities, no problems.
Yeah. You know, the big city women try and vamp you. That is an obscure reference. In fact, if you get that reference and you can tell me who said it on television, call in. Don't call him with guesses.
I'm looking over at I'm actually looking at the phone right now to see if it's lighting up.
You have to know.
You can't Google it, people. You can't.
You have to know who said that and where.
I have no idea who said that and where.
And so we see this pattern then in Genesis, that the places where the worship of the true God is preserved, right, is among the Abrahamites, right, like the Midianites, like Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, has preserved the worship of the true God, right, and some of the Edomites have, but not all of the Abrahamites even, because very quickly we see as we go through the Torah that the Moabite.
And I have to say, this is partially how. I mean, the emphasis on communal knowing that Father Stephen has is a little bit beyond what Judaism demands. They seem to believe that this idea, so Christianity has this idea of the necessity of going out and evangelizing and teaching and, you know, all of that stuff, whereas Judaism kind of dismisses that, really. Like, no, God knows. So like Sentinel Island, there's this violent cannibalistic tribe that lives there that tries to kill anybody who comes by, and they're very backwards. And every once in a while, some Christian missionary decides that he's got to bring Jesus to this tribe, and they kill him. Like that's a Christian idea. That's not a Jewish idea. Like God can reveal things in rural India to an individual if he wants to, and through his methods. Now, do I believe that the internet is suddenly making it a lot more possible for people in this generation to know the truth? Yeah, I do. Do I hope that my channel is a pathway God uses in that? Yes, I do. Does that mean that I need to be spending money advertising this channel? I don't. That's actually been a part of the thing that, like, I really haven't advertised my channels as such, because it's like, if people want to come here, I am more than glad to have them. When Father Stephen happened to start watching, I was more than glad to have him. His involvement has certainly made my channel grow. I'm more than glad to contribute however I can. But I don't need to do anything more than what God decides to do with that which I should be doing anyway. And I think hopefully you can see how the Jewish view of continuity leads a different path than what they're describing.
It's now that they've come and settled in the land that God brought them to, according to Deuteronomy 2, the Moabites start worshiping Chemosh, the moon god, and other pagan gods.
And I saw some of that stuff earlier. I saw Moabite texts on, cuneiform tablets and Shemish stuff at that museum. I'm telling you guys, it's like a Lord of Spirits museum. I'm getting no kickbacks for this advertisement, by the way.
Yeah.
I just had a very good time at the museum.
Now, I mean, the British Museum is better.
The British
also
Museum
farther away.
is possibly the greatest museum in the world.
Yeah. But much farther away.
Yes,
yeah,
a little more,
and not guilt-free, given that everything there is kind of stolen.
Indeed, there's a whole like plaque or sign at the front of this museum here in Chicago that actually kind of apologizes on some level for the fact that they have a bunch of these artifacts, but explains like the laws at the time had an arrangement where some artifacts were allowed to go during the excavations, and then some were given to the host country. So it was like sort of giving an explanation of like, no, we didn't steal all this stuff. That's right. We had a deal. We had a licensing agreement.
Yeah. They accepted the terms and conditions. So now Disney gets to kill your wife. Anyway,
living here in 2024. Yeah.
So, and as we mentioned, right, right. So on the one hand, right, you see the Moabites once they settle, and this is of course the big warning in Deuteronomy to the Israelites is that God telling them, not really warning them, he's kind of just telling them what's going to happen, that once they come into the land and they settle down and they plant their crops and they plant their vineyards and they're living in their cities, that they'll forget about him.
Yeah, because they don't need him anymore. They're not dependent on him anymore.
They'll fall into the paganism, right, of the world. But even that is not a given, because as we mentioned before, Melchizedek is the king of a city, right, the city of Jerusalem.
And he's keeping it real.
And he still is worshiping the true God. He's still worshiping Yahweh when Abraham gets there, right? So it's not a foregone conclusion. That's what he was.
He's not worshiping Yahweh,
it's dangerous,
by the way.
right? It's more difficult. There's a
What?
He's not worshiping the Tetragrammaton at that time. I said he said a different name over there, and that's not the name he's worshiping at the time. I mean, from Enosh, that gets diluted.
That's, yeah, I mean, I hear you. That's not, I mean, they have this whole idea of cities and giants and things that they go with.
We have giants, we have cities, that's all good. That's fine. We still wouldn't say that that's the name that they're using, though. That's not what he's recognized in.
Yeah. But, okay, you also have to understand that they have this big thing about Melchizedek and a priest, because
Right.
Melchizedek and Jesus and all that.
By the way, we should just mention then again with Abraham then, v'etkol nefesh asher asa b'charan, right? So Abraham has his universal message, mission in the beginning, which at least he thinks, which is talking about monotheism to all people. You know what's going down in Shem ve'ever. That is one version of it, but then the other Lech Lecha comes and he has to leave, and God asks him to focus at the time on himself, on his own, on his own people. So he leaves Haran. But there is already a discussion, which is him speaking about God's name. But again, that is a more universal version of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're reading the Hebrew, especially with the Midrashim, you just end up with a very, very different view than the one that they're describing, which is why when I started listening to this podcast, I was like, I'm gonna have to do a commentary, because ultimately, like, we're going to end up with, okay, now here's Jesus and Christianity, and that's where it definitely breaks. And it seems to me like, no, this starts at the very beginning in Genesis with the misunderstandings that they have, partially because they're not doing it in Hebrew.
tendency.
I have to say now, by the way, like, this is already the most unusual Lord of Spirits episode ever, because instead of being by myself in a dark room, as I mentioned earlier, I am sitting across from Trudy the Tank Richter, but I'm also now next to the CEO of Ancient Faith Ministries, Huri Melinda Johnson, who's waving in a vigorous way that none of you can see. But nonetheless, it is true. And so yes, this is a group effort here.
So you have this feeling that you're being watched.
I am literally being watched and listened to.
And this is the most ridiculous thing ever, because everyone knows I'm the one who needs the supervision.
No.
Like, you're kind of fine on your own recognizance. I'm the one who's going to get us into trouble.
Clearly, we can't trust your wife to keep an eye on you.
I do this from the church. She's not even here. I don't think she even listens half the time. She's done with me. Like, I've heard you talk all day. Like, I don't need any more of this.
Exactly.
This is my break.
I've
go to the church and talk to everyone else.
I've heard of all this. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah, I am.
Can confirm.
Yeah. Anarchy in more ways than one. I don't even have a plan. So we talked about last time, right? So that the axial age, there is this shift that happens also that sort of produces Second Temple Judaism, right? That we see a shift from what's.
Oops, sorry, I have to unmute myself. He calls it a shift, but we don't believe there was a shift that created Second Temple Judaism. It was the prophets who created the Second Temple Judaism, right? And this is, yeah, go ahead, Chazi.
I'm saying that's super important, right? I mean, because if you lose the continuity of revelation, then it's a bust. Ultimately, that's what we're going back to.
Yeah, and that's the thing. What Christianity does not have is this idea, oh, the synagogue service was instituted by the prophets, Hosea 14, right? Neshalma parim sefatenu, right? Which, I mean, to a Gentile audience, once you realize that, you see, oh, well, there you go. You're like, you the whole Christian Jesus thing just completely falls apart, right? Because Christianity very much went on, oh, well, what are you going to do now that the temple's been destroyed? And it's like, well, I mean, the prophets after the destruction of the first temple told us. That's why we have the synagogue service.
Okay, but I think, to be fair, you would agree that Tenli Yavna v'Chachameh is a shift.
Say that again.
Tenli Yavne v'Chachameh, right? Give me Yavne and her wise men, right? Is a shift.
How is it a shift?
Well, that is moving from, like I'm saying, the move from the temple to the synagogue and the focus on on, let's say, the code. I'm saying definitely once you move to diaspora, obviously creates like a shift within.
Well, I wouldn't say so. This is like, this was something that was established. How Judaism was going to function in Galut was established by the prophets. That's why we still say prayers which were established by the prophets. And
yes, but Jacob, there is a difference though between, I'm saying, the Gemara talks about Shimon HaPukuli, who creates, who basically reorders the silent prayer, and there's a whole discussion there, which is basically when they're in exile, there needs to be this sequence to the prayers, and when they're with the temple, it's a lot more intuitive and it's not needed. So even like theologically and how they relate to their prayers themselves, there are shifts based on if they're in the promised land or if they're in exile, and those shifts. Like I said, not only are they there's like a practice change, but there's also like a theological change that's required as well.
Yeah, but all of that was revealed to Moshe on Mount Sinai.
Yes, and that, that's also alluding to the famous time machine experience that Moses has, that the Talmud tries to illuminate to us, right? When he takes him and shows him Rabbi Akiva.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the thing. It was, Moses in the eighth row of Rabbi Akiva's classroom.
Eighth row symbolizing like past, above nature, infinity. This is always true. This will always be.
Yeah.
Yada yada yada. I'll be with you in a moment. Just dropping off child number 2.
It's called ancient Israelite religion.
Yep.
After the exile.
Yep.
Return to the land. That's a product of things that happened in the exile, product of the shift in status.
Yep. Big focus
Judah.
on the Torah, like Josiah, all that stuff, everybody.
Josiah was way before this, but anyway.
Yes. But I mean, it's emblematic of this idea, right? Of this renewed focus on texts and so forth.
Sort of. Yeah. But so after the return from exile, now Judah is no longer an independent kingdom. It's Judea. It's a Persian province.
Yep. A shadow of its former self.
Then a Greek Seleucid province, and then a Roman province. But there's this shift where you get the emergence of the synagogue system that happens, and the corresponding emphasis on texts and the public reading of texts and of scribal activity and copying and studying and mastering the texts. And this then also, this literacy emphasis then also produces an emphasis on putting things in writing. So this is when you get this explosion of Second Temple Jewish literature, which is recording what was previously oral tradition into these various texts, these various documents around and surrounding the Hebrew scriptures.
So we have a very different belief, right? It's not like writing just started. Writing has been around since the time of Moses, right? We believe that there was a written Torah and there was an oral law, right? The law of Moses, the Torah of Moses is eternal, right? We needed prophets to come and write the other prophetic books, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, right, for us to have better understanding of the Torah of Moses, but the Torah of Moses remains eternal, right? And ultimately, there came a time after the destruction of the Second Temple when it became necessary to even start writing things from the oral law down because people were forgetting, right? I don't like where he's like this shift that he's talking about. I don't see the reasoning for it. I don't see why we need to go down this road. There was always an oral law. There was always a written law. Moses wrote the Torah scroll like that. The Torah scroll of Moses was a thing at the time of Moses, right? And so there was always a written component. The shift, the axial age shift that he's making, I don't see how he makes the history match either.
All this starts happening in the Axial Age, but this is a shift and a trend that affects everybody everywhere.
Yeah, right. As we said in great detail last time. By the way, I have to share this with everybody. Someone on the YouTubes, the tubes of you, just asked very reasonable question. Does Trudy have entrance music? And when she is finally inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and there's some kind of nook there in the exhibit that's dedicated
they don't have a physical Hall of Fame.
Trudy the Tank Richter. Well, we have to.
Actually, they don't have a physical.
But maybe a website.
This is a topic of much controversy.
Will it play the music like when you go and click on the tank exhibit?
I don't know what her music would be. My entrance music is William Shatner's cover with Peter Frampton of Spirit in the Sky. That is my entrance music.
That is excellent. Yes, that is, and that's on YouTube, by the way.
Yes. On which song Frampton does indeed come alive.
I think if I had to pick entrance music for myself, it's an even toss-up between Chibo Mato's Know Your Chicken and Nerf Herder's Van Halen.
I would have to go with the Toreador music that what's his name? The Merchant of Menace. I'm forgetting his name. Who was that attack comedian? I can see on his okay, I'm not gonna make this any longer for that, but like you guys know what I'm talking about, the guy with the Toreador music. Let's listen. And
I think that's where I am today anyway.
I'm thinking they just play Pomp and Circumstance.
I won't tell you what we called it when I was in high school band.
Because you're supervised.
I am supervised.
Yeah.
But I'm also much anyway.
Yeah.
I'm much more restrained than my very reverend Dr. co-host.
That's not saying much.
Very true.
So what we didn't mention, right, last time was that the interesting fact that there are a bunch of critiques of the idea of the axial age.
Yeah.
So the term is used by everybody now.
Oh, by the way, your wife just weighed in on Facebook.
Oh, is she actually listening?
She said Thursday nights, he's your responsibility, Father.
Oh, there we go. See, there we go. She is officially, if caught or captured, she denies all knowledge of my activities.
Custody has been transferred.
So
does that mean I get your action figures if something horrible happens to you?
No, I'm looking at other people.
All right. They're probably laid out one by one in your will, I bet.
You wouldn't even like clean them with canned air or anything. You would just leave them in a box or something.
And actually, what would happen is my wife would sell them on eBay.
There you go. See,
it's true.
Everybody uses the phrase the axial age now to refer to the same thing, to refer to the same period.
Everybody might be a little broad, but yes. Everyone who's talking about it.
Yes, everybody talks about it.
Right.
Most people don't talk about this that often.
Yeah, weirdly on the streets of Chicago today, even at the University of Chicago, I did not hear people talk about the axial age.
Yes, but everyone who talks about it calls it the axial age.
Yeah.
They use that term. Everyone who talks about the topic.
Don Rickles. That's who I was thinking of.
Yes, I realize that most people, unlike me, do not think about the Roman Empire every day. But there was, especially when it was first proposed, there was disagreement about it. And there are still some people who kind of have an axe to grind who will use the phrase, like they'll put it in scare quotes, like the religious shifts of the axial age in scare quotes, because they don't want to say they fully buy it. But where we're going here is one of the main criticisms, possibly the most common and prominent criticism of the idea of the axial age is that the axial age can't really be all that important and can't really be the axial age, as in this axis upon which things pivot.
Everything turns,
because Christianity arises later.
Yeah.
This has been one of the big criticisms.
Okay.
And this assumes a couple of things, right? Number one, you can see why we've spent a lot of time on this show describing in completely objective, non-sarcastic terms our 18th and 19th century German friends. But when the axial age is first being discussed and proposed by one of our early 20th century German Swiss friends, you have to understand that academia, the circles in which he's talking about this, are firmly entrenched in this developmental idea of religion, right? Which, of course, is all leading up to 19th century German Lutheranism, and therefore sees the rise of Christianity as the most transformative event in world history.
Yeah, like the rise of a new kind of religion. And not to just pop culture this out a little bit, but I recall, not Civilization 6, but there was an earlier iteration of Civilization that as religion shows up in the game, like different religions appear at different points, and it completely uses this idea, this evolutionary idea of religion. Like there's earlier forms, and then Christianity is like this almost last one.
Yeah,
which is kind of a wacky thing to do for Access games.
And it's this massive shift, and assumed in there, for reasons we've also talked about before, that are related to the fact that they're Germans, is this idea that there's this just incredible discontinuity between Christianity and preceding Judaism.
Yeah, which I mean, a lot of Christians buy that idea. And they would,
Marcionites.
Yeah, right. Yes, but they would, but I mean, just to be as charitable as possible to them, which I think is sort of my bit in the podcast. But to be as charitable as possible, I think it's this idea that Jesus appears on the scene and that changes everything, right? Like there's new revelation that changes everything. Yeah, so it's understandable. It's understandable.
Right. The problem is when you go past that to demeaning the Torah, the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, marginalizing it,
which no one in the New Testament does.
Right.
Sorry, Martin Luther.
But for our early 20th century scholarly friends on the international stage, right, they're firmly indoctrinated into that, right? That the religion of the Pharisees was this dark and evil thing, and Christianity is this complete novum, completely different, virtually, if not actually, a different God.
Yeah.
Right. And so for them, again, they see this massive discontinuity, and this massive discontinuity is after the axial age. So all these shifts of the axial age pale in comparison and can't be that important, was sort of the criticism.
But
the critical assumptions in there are fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, and the reason why we know that's the case is by looking closely at Second Temple Judaism.
Right.
Yeah.
And Second Temple Judaisms, the vast variety of forms Judaism took in the Second Temple period. And
we've always had heretics. We continue to have heretics. There we go. There's this idea that God always preserves a remnant who keep to the true faith, and the way we know who is right is who is able to pass things from generation to generation, which is how we understand what Gamliel seems to be saying in Acts 5, right? So Gamliel in Acts 5 says, look, like if let's see who's right by seeing who persists, right? And as I have been arguing vociferously on Twitter lately, obviously the Christianity of the early Christians did not persist. We see that it did not persist. And so, yeah, they were wrong. It's taken thousands of years for Christians to kind of be like, finally come to the realization that they've always been wrong. And obviously God uses all of these mistakes for the good, right? Just like Joseph, right? When his brothers should not have sold him to Egypt. His bones should be brought back to the land, but God uses this mistake to bring out of Egypt what all of the sparks of holiness that is within it, right? So similar story, like the great sin of creating Christianity will eventually end in the bones of Joseph being brought back to the land by the the faithful remnant, right? Who, despite the fact that so much there was so much idolatry in Egypt, actually does leave Egypt, right?
The realization, which fortunately even totally secular scholars, Christian scholars, Jewish scholars, non-religious scholars, right, of Christian origins have pretty much all come around to now, that Christianity is a Second Temple Judaism.
Right.
It is a form of Second Temple Judaism, right? That basically two forms of Second Temple Judaism, Pharisaism and Christianity, which are closely related because Christianity is ultimately a variation of Pharisaism, are the two forms of Second Temple Judaism that survived the destruction of the Second Temple and are now Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, respectively. Right. And one interesting thing that's come out of me writing a recent book.
I would generally agree with that. What has Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism both are the two surviving forms of the Judaisms, and I would say Islam actually is a third, right? That that survived, right? And I think the reason God has Islam and Christianity both is so that it is possible to understand what is the true teaching, which is Judaism.
Oh, that's right, everybody.
Keep an eye on the internet.
There's a book coming out next week, everybody. Which we told some of you, called St. Paul the Pharisee, Jewish Apostle to the Nations.
And that I've had some interesting discussions about with some Jewish folks is that one of the places where you see...
I wonder who he might be talking about, Jewish folks.
How closely related Pharisaic Judaism and Christianity are, is that both Christianity and the Pharisaism that becomes Rabbinic Judaism both want to claim Gamaliel.
Yeah.
There are icons of him, by the way. He's a saint in the order.
I wonder who said that to him. I didn't know he mentioned me in this episode, but here we go.
Orthodox Church.
Amen.
And he's one of the most prominent rabbis in the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud.
More people need to name their kids after him.
Gamaliel.
Actually, he himself, Gamliel the first, isn't in the Mishnah. Gamliel the second. So Gamliel the first is barely mentioned in the Mishnah. Gamliel, so his son Shimon is, then his son Gamliel is, and then his son Shimon is. Gamliel himself is a descendant of Hillel, that many Christians may have heard of. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the redactor of the Mishnah, is the descendant of Rabban Gamliel the first, Rabban Shimon, Rabban Gamliel, and then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel the second. And you can look. I am not the best at these genealogies, but or Rabbinic Judaism definitely claims to be a descendant of Gamliel, 100%.
Yeah, that's a great name.
Yeah. So, right, these are two closely allied Second Temple Judaisms that, being the two survivors, then gradually split off from each other. Read Religion of the Apostles, find out all about that.
That's literally the introduction, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's kind of
St. Paul convert? Question mark.
Yeah. So Christianity, therefore, since it is a form of Second Temple Judaism, that means it is a continuation of Second Temple Judaism. Right? It is fundamentally the same thing. Right? Now, that is not to say that the coming of Jesus as the Messiah is a small thing or unimportant.
Right.
Right? Obviously, it is the most important thing to ever happen in history.
I disagree. I don't think it was that great. I think it was nice that this offshoot of Judaism, like Islam, has been preparing the world. But I would say that if there were fewer sins, it wouldn't have happened. And frankly, that's like part of my thing with Christians is like, well, don't you agree it would have been better if an innocent Jesus was not crucified by the Romans, and frankly, so there are parts of the Talmud which have been interpreted by people as being like that it was a legitimate putting to death of Jesus, which I don't think I don't think halakhically that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's a whole other thing, discussion within Judaism, which most people wouldn't want to have, which is like, well, are those sections of the Talmud supposed to be saying that Jesus being put to death was a kosher halakhic thing? I don't think that's the proper understanding of those segments. Unfortunately, because of the censorship, we don't actually have enough internal Jewish discussion about that, I think, to have a definitive answer that everyone is aware of.
History, right?
Right.
But we're talking about something that was anticipated and expected and prophesied and believed about for centuries beforehand within Second Temple Judaism.
Yeah, it didn't come out of nowhere, which is why Jesus very rightly is chiding.
Well, I mean, the coming of the Jewish Messiah, yes, but that's not what happened. And certainly not how Christians viewed it.
People all the time like, hello.
Yeah.
You know?
That if you knew Moses, you would know him.
Right.
And then Christianity's focus upon it is a reflection upon it having happened, right? So yes, you move from anticipation of this event happening to reflections upon this event having happened, but that's a passage of time.
Right.
That's not a change in the religion.
Yeah, it's not a new religion.
Right. So yes, this temporal transition has happened, right?
That's very hard to say with the Trinity. Nobody was teaching the Trinity even during the time of Jesus, much less as it became formulated at Nicaea. As I like to say, it was at Nicaea that the Christians turned their back on Jesus, on Judaism, on Israel, and on God.
But that's it. And so the reason we took the time to come back and do this here at the beginning of this episode, which, yes, technically we're still at the beginning of this episode, as these things go for us.
That's true.
We're going to use, so there's this relationship then between Second Temple Judaism and Christianity that we just talked about, this relationship of continuity, right? But within that continuity, there are things that change. Like there's a New Testament now, right?
Yep.
Which I would say is a discontinuity.
There's, right, et cetera, et cetera. There are these things that change, right? But there's this overarching continuity and not a break. So we're going to use this as sort of a paradigm for understanding how you can have changes and shifts of different sorts without breaking continuity.
Even within the history of Christianity per se.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Later. That's what we're going to apply this paradigm to, is
exactly.
other such things.
Which I just want to underline this because, I mean, this is one of the fundamental assumptions, not just of this, the 100 episodes we've done now, although it super is, but it really, people, if you look closely at the writings of the church fathers, if you look closely at the texts of the services of the Orthodox Church, this assumption is everywhere. And I think if someone reads a radical discontinuity in this, honestly, they're looking at it with Martin Luther eyes. That's just what that's
not
what
necessarily Martin Luther. They could be Muslims.
No, well, there's exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's this idea of that the Torah is over in some way,
Right,
which if that were true, I mean, we actually had someone post something like this earlier in our Facebook group today, where they were quoting from St. Justin Martyr, who was talking about Deuteronomy and was wondering, like, is what he says here about Deuteronomy, where he talks about, these things no longer bind you, like, is he basically saying like that the Torah is no longer in effect, because you could certainly read it that way, but that's frankly a very Protestant reading.
Yeah. Well,
I would see, this is the thing, like, I can't wait for the Protestants to start actually arguing with Father Stephen, because I don't care to dissuade Christians about, but like, I think it's pretty clear that Christianity for thousands of years has been maybe trying to, and this is my whole thing with Father Stephen, right? I like that Father Stephen is there to make these arguments with Christians, and in a sense, it's like, okay, yeah, move them along, Father, because like they've got to realize how silly much of what they say is.
And even more common now, maybe just more common in the circles I hang around in, but which are dodgy circles.
Deep and weird.
Yeah.
More parallelograms than circles, I would say.
More a rhombus of a sort. It's less of the Old Testament, New Testament discontinuity. Because I think, we settled this with Marcion. We settled this in the beginning of the 2nd century, right? Come on. But there is still a lot among sort of out-of-date liberal scholars and Muslims. This attempt to drive this wedge between Jesus and St. Paul.
Oh, yeah.
That they're doing two different things. And that Christianity is this Pauline religion that St. Paul made up.
Right.
Right. Which also has as a feature chucking the Torah in the bin.
And this is not just an extended, pitch for your book. That's,
I mean, I would like for him to actually convince me even, right? But like, yeah.
Coming out next week. But
no, it is not.
I have not been convinced.
But everyone should go ahead and buy that book when it comes out if you're interested in exploring this more deeply.
But yeah, of the two, I'm the one of us least prone to self-shill.
That's true. You're not even on the social medias anymore.
No. Yeah. Yeah. So there's that sort of attempt, right? But yeah, so there is this great continuity, but that continuity is not denying that things happened, that the things that happened were important, right? And that there are these various shifts. So to kind of break this down, since we're going to be using this as a paradigm, right? We're going to be applying this to other things, right? What are the important points of continuity that we're talking about? Where are the places where we need to have a kind of continuity in order to say that there is an overall continuity despite other things maybe shifting, changing, varying somewhat?
Yeah, and how can you tell when something is in discontinuity?
Right. And if one of these things is broken, now we're talking about something else.
Right, a new religion.
Yeah, and as we apply this paradigm, we're going to be arguing not just like, hey, Father Andrew and I came up with this cool thing. We're essentially going to be arguing that, like, as especially the early church fathers are addressing different groups, right? This is essentially the model that they're implicitly using. Not explicitly, like there's no church father who I can quote you who's going to lay this out exactly the way we're going to lay it out.
Yeah, there's no systematic formula.
But implicitly, right, you read St. Irenaeus Against Heresies, right? You'll see him making arguments related to these points we're talking about, and vice versa. Where do you think we're getting these points? Anyway, so yeah, I'm surprised. Really, folks, instead of accusing me of never quoting the church fathers, you should be accusing me of plagiarizing the church fathers for using their stuff and not citing them.
How dare you, sir?
And if you knew the church fathers better, that's probably what you'd do. So there's an idea.
It's all in public domain now.
This is kind of like my little joke that I plagiarize everything from the rabbis, and I do.
By the way.
And this is going to sound strange and foreign, I know, to some people, some Christian people. That is the idea of primary and secondary scriptures. And by that, I'm not referring to things that are deuterocanonical.
Right.
Well, just to be clear for you, Father Stephen DeYoung graduated with his MDiv from Westminster in California, and then took classes at Calvin to show that he knew the three forms of unity and everything well enough for the CRC. He was, what do they call it? He was licensed but not ordained in the CRC. And he grew up in the CRC. So he knows Protestantism better than most Protestants, I would say. And which is part of the reason he still has family who are at least affiliated with the CRC, and so I think he actually should tell the story of how he came to become an Orthodox priest, but he doesn't feel comfortable doing that. He's actually told me that if he decides to tell that story, he will do it on my channel, which I will gladly have him on for. And I think it's a beautiful story, but at the same time, he really doesn't, he feels icky about the types of people who are like, oh, well, I used to be an Eastern Orthodox priest and now I'm Protestant, so da 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 da. And he doesn't like playing that game. So he doesn't actually talk about his credentials very often, except when people dismiss him as not knowing anything about the CRC. Sometimes I've seen him kind of go like, well, I did get my MDiv from Westminster.
And I think the reason people aren't used to thinking this way is because of the deep impact that sola scriptura has made on the American culture and Northern European culture more broadly, where it's spread throughout the world, where scriptures are scriptures and everything that's not scripture is not scripture, and that's it, right? But this isn't the way scriptures have functioned in the history of Judaism and Christianity.
Right.
There are primary and secondary scriptures within the canon, so it's pretty hard to argue and be taken seriously by anyone that the Torah doesn't occupy a special place within Judaism and all the way through, right? That it is in some way the primary scripture, and then the rest of the Hebrew scriptures are sort of secondary to it, because they're all in different ways reflecting on.
He's 100% correct here.
The contents of the Torah.
Yeah, commenting, applying,
right,
regurgitating,
right, seeing history through the lens of it, or applying it,
interpreting,
interpreting it, right, right. And so you have this relationship, and we have built into our liturgical forms a similar relationship within the New Testament.
Oh, sure. I mean, just look at set the content aside. Just look at the way the Gospels are treated in the services, and look at the way readings from the Acts and the Epistles are treated in the services.
Right.
It's not the same.
And and it's very obvious, right? Like someone walked in who knew nothing about Christianity, and they heard the one reading where someone just gets up and does it. And generally in the Orthodox Church, someone who's not even Orthodox can do the epistle reading.
It's theoretically possible. I know. There's a bunch of people clutching their pearls right now, but I will give you an ancient example just so you can let go of those pearls, so they can be passed on to your grandchildren. It was possible in the early patristic period. Actually, I hesitate to use that phrase, but you know what I'm talking about, like 4th, 5th, 6th century, to tonsure a catechumen as a reader. Like the guy was designated as a reader, and yet was not even a Christian, an Orthodox Christian yet. He's not even baptized yet. But he could be a liturgical reader in the services. Now, I'm not saying that we should do that now, but I'm just saying that this is a thing. This is a thing.
Yes, and this is commonly done throughout the Orthodox world. It is carried over from the fact that in synagogues, guests are frequently invited to do the Haftorah reading, not the Torah reading.
A visitor. Yeah.
Not the Torah reading.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Haftarah. Well, I mean, people are called for aliyot. Yeah, I guess in a modern synagogue, you usually have a Baal Koreh. There is a difference between reading the Torah and the Haftarah. Especially since the Haftarah can be read not out of a scroll. Some people, very few people, have a Haftarah scroll. The Torah reading has to be done from a scroll.
Right? They don't get up there and touch the Torah scroll. Okay. But the Haftarah reading, a non-Jewish person, right? And
having a non-Jewish person. Have you ever heard of No, you can't have a non-Jew receive an aliyah for the Haftarah, can you? Chazi's busy. I don't think you can have a non-Jew receive. I don't think you can have a non-Jew receive an aliyah, even a Haftarah. I mean, if you were to give a Gentile an aliyah, it would have to be the Haftarah, because you couldn't call you could not call an Israelite up after you called up a Gentile. CRC is a tiny branch, but it's still like, I mean, Reformed is pretty big within Protestantism. Chazi, is it possible to call a Gentile up for an aliyah, even as a mosif or a haftarah? Maybe as maftir? Is it possible to call a Gentile up for
No,
Motzi?
because how would he give the brachas and be what's the word for motzi, everyone? But be what would be the word to motzi someone?
To be a designated delegate.
He can't be a designated delegate.
Right. Yeah.
Even in the blessings themselves, right? Asher Kiddushan V'Tzivanu, there is no commandment for him.
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah.
but your point about a certain Noahide we know mentioned that he might be coming to Israel. I just don't want to out him if he doesn't want to know. But
he told me, yeah.
Right. So
no reason to publicize it on international television.
Correct. Yeah. So and this is where he's going to be staying. No, but I told him same I did with Trey last time when he was visiting. You know, the rabbi of my synagogue is very, very happy, or the synagogue I used to be in, it was very, very happy to have them over. And that is the conversation. That is
especially this particular Noachide, I believe is interested in going before a Beit Din to be Mikabel Shava Mitzvot B'nai Noach.
If he wants to do that, then he should, and if he hears this, just let me know so I could schedule something with the Rabbi Shirky and the crew.
That would be very nice. You do realize that if he meets Rabbi Shirky, I'm going to have to tell him to ask Rabbi Shirky to ordain you as a rabbi, right?
Rabbi Shirky, I just posted on the Noahide Discord that Rabbi Shirky and Rabbi Manis had a conversation together.
Friedman?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Indeed. So I'm a big fan. But sorry, I digress. Go on.
Yeah, I should probably yeah.
I don't know where
so I think Father I think Father Stephen I understand what he means, but I don't think he's getting his details right here.
And we've continued that trend. And people sit for it. Everyone stands for the gospel. Only clergy read the gospel book. There's a procession with the gospel book, just like there was a procession with the Torah.
Placed in the middle of the altar.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This is just the case.
Veneration of the gospel book.
And if the New Testament is working fundamentally the same way, you have the Gospels of our Lord Jesus Christ, and then you have the epistles, which includes the apostolicon, the apostolic writings, right, with all the rest of the New Testament writings, which are interpreting and applying the birth, life, death, resurrection, ascension into heaven, enthronement of Christ. Right, that's what they're doing. That's what St. Paul says he's doing. Right, he's going out and preaching Christ and Him crucified. He's preaching about he's preaching the gospel. He's preaching the contents of the Gospels. Right. This is why it's traditional for homilies in most cases to be about the gospel reading.
Indeed, that's what the word means. Homilia. It means the same.
Yeah.
Literally, that's what it means in Greek is the same. He's now going to say the same thing, but in different words.
Right. And that doesn't mean that they're not scriptures. It just means that within the scriptures, there are these relationships.
Yeah.
Right. So St. Peter already calls St. Paul's writings scriptures, St. Paul's letters.
And that's why he's still alive.
While he's still alive, still writing them at the same time. Right. So how does that work? Right. Well, this gets into how Second Temple Jewish writing worked in general. Right? Second Temple Jewish writing in general. We talked about within the Second Temple period, there's this burgeoning of all of these other texts sort of around the scriptures that are putting down in writing things that previously had been oral traditions surrounding the scriptures. Right. And these texts, right, were read and used and were treated as holy books by different communities. Right. But they were always on the level of here is how we interpret and apply the Torah in most cases within our community. Right. And so
what text
for St. Peter,
talking about there?
Right, looking at the way
he's already talking about what they consider the Apocrypha.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah.
St. Paul's letters were functioning within the Christian communities, the churches in all these different cities. Right. He saw them functioning as that kind of scripture.
Yeah, he's not saying, I am St. Peter, and therefore I solemnly canonize the writings of my fellow apostle.
These texts. Yeah, he doesn't give a list.
Yeah, it's like, oh, yes, I see you guys using them this way. That's what they are.
Right. And so he understands that's how a certain type of scripture is used. Right. And so he recognizes that. That is in keeping with, right, well, in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, one category of the text is sectarian text.
Oh, I saw a piece of a Dead Sea Scroll today.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I sent Father Stephen a photo of it. That's a Dead Sea Scroll.
Well, fragment of one. Yeah.
Yes.
What?
He's saying Paul is saying it's that kind of text. Is he saying that a part of the prophets or their writings is that kind of text?
He thinks of the Gospels and the letters of Paul, and I guess some other letters which were written by other apostles, as he thinks of them kind of like Enoch, etc., right? Which were not necessary. So, I mean, they don't even necessarily agree to the difference between Ketuvim and what he calls Apocrypha, right? So, I
mean, just is he talking about again like the Sfarim Chitzonim, like Ben Sira and Maccabees? And...
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely talking about Maccabees. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I mean, because we definitely don't see Ben Sira. Obviously, we just see it like Ben Sira would be more akin to like not Pirkei Avot, but like this is just wise things that were said.
Okay, I mean Ben Sira. I mean, is it even Sfarim Kitzonim that shouldn't be read?
No, it's not. That's the borderline one.
Okay, Yosiphon, right? The Josephus,
Yeah,
like
Josephus.
I mean, I understand the point that he's making. I don't necessarily agree with the various details, and obviously, I wouldn't include Paul in anything scriptures, partially because it was written in Greek, right? It's like if you're going to write Jewish scriptures, you're going to write them in Hebrew or Aramaic at least.
I mean, we could take a controversial route, which have to, but that.
Thank God you're droiding, because God doesn't want you speaking this heresies, because we can't understand you. You're totally droiding. God has decided that these heresies should not be spoken out loud.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yeah.
Pete? Okay, so I was gonna, maybe I shouldn't say it now. That if we want to even go with the
yeah, you definitely shouldn't say it. God has decided that these are not things that need to be said. I'm gonna go back to the thing.
a bit.
Yeah, a chunk. Right, and those texts were for the organization of the community, right? So they had this category, and this is an existing category. But those texts that are constitutive of the community, right? They're how St. Paul's epistles are how those early Christian communities came to be.
Yes, now we can hear you. You want to give it one more try and become a Ben Chazaka? Can you hear me? He can't even hear me.
Organized in terms of their leadership, in terms of their worship, in terms of their way of life. All of these things, right, are being organized into these texts. So this is one category of continuity, right? Are we using the same texts? This is why it's so important that you don't throw out the Old Testament. Because if you do throw out the Old Testament, you're now a new religion. Congratulations.
You're a Marcionite heretic.
You're not Judaism or Christianity. You're something else.
Yeah.
So having the same formative body of scriptures, right, is part of the continuity.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. You want to try it again? You've tried 3 times so far. You have a chazaka for it not working. But go ahead.
So I'm saying we can go as controversial as, which is always controversial.
Again, we're losing you. I'm telling you, Tashkacha Pratit.
Right. You know what? If it makes sense to say again, I'll say it again. You can continue.
You also have a continuity of forms of worship, right? Now, people may point at this and say, people of certain bent, and say, well, wait a minute. Second Temple Jewish worship, they're offering animal sacrifices in the temple.
And only there, only in that one geographic
there.
spot.
And Christianity isn't doing that. We're not going to get into the whole argument about the Eucharist being a sacrifice right now. Right? I've got a published.
I don't mind that. I mind way more the fact that there's no Amidah.
Journal article on that. Go read that. Right? But a couple points right, about that.
Things you may not have heard, actually.
Yes. So number one, there were already within Second Temple Judaism forms of Second Temple Judaism that were doing temple things outside the temple in Jerusalem.
Everybody got
the Yosef likes to debate about this. I don't so much. Frankly, it doesn't matter to me. There were all kinds of sects who did all kinds of stupid things. It was a huge mistake on their part, and God put an end to it.
off the floor. I know this is a little shocking. Animal sacrifices going on in places.
As the offering of incense.
Yeah, going on in places other than the temple in Jerusalem, and it was not being like decried, spoken against.
They were not being considered heretics and evil and anything else.
This was a thing, boys and girls.
So
not being decried.
That's not true.
Like they're like everybody was calling everybody it. I'm sorry. Yeah. And yes, Moses already knew the number of shots that you're going to take. Listen to this.
Probably the most prominent one was the Jewish temple in Leontopolis, which was sort of on the outskirts, in modern terms, a suburb, but they didn't really have suburbs, near Alexandria in Egypt, which is basically where most of the Alexandrian Jewish community.
And they were heretics.
He was concentrated. What was Leontopolis is now referred to as Tel Yehudi, the Hill of the Jews.
How about that?
Because there's still that connection there. And there was a temple there to the God of Israel. And it didn't even look like the temple in Jerusalem. It was an obelisk.
I'm still trying to picture that in my head. Like, how does that work? Because an obelisk is mostly like the Washington Monument.
Yeah, it's an obelisk. They got a door in the bottom.
Okay.
Right? And the bottom floor is the temple proper.
Okay.
They go in and burn incense.
All right.
There's two hanging lamps on either side of the door. And you go in. It had been a temple to Bast, the cat god. But when the Jewish community came to predominate in Leontopolis, they turned it into a Jewish temple. And they justified it using the Psalm verse that talks about there being an altar of incense to God in Egypt. But also, the way this worked, and we know about this because Philo made use of this, Philo of Alexandria. The way it was viewed was not as a second temple or a second temple, or a replacement for the temple in Jerusalem.
Judaism 2.5.
But it was viewed as sort of an outpost of the temple in Jerusalem, as connected to the temple in Jerusalem. So that they would still send money to Jerusalem to the temple. They would still go and make pilgrimage to Jerusalem to the temple. But for sort of day-to-day stuff, right? Because obviously you can't travel from Alexandria, Egypt to Jerusalem back and forth, right? At this period in history.
Even today,
often.
that is very difficult.
Yeah, but you couldn't do it very often then. For day-to-day stuff, they would go to this one in Leontopolis, right? There also may have been, there's a lot of debate about this, on Elephantine Island, a temple in Jerusalem. By the way, the temple in Leontopolis was actually the only Jewish temple for 3 years.
Huh.
The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. The one in Leontopolis was destroyed in AD 73. And that was when the Roman emperor ordered the governor to destroy it because he was worried that with the temple in Jerusalem destroyed there in Alexandria, that might become a rallying point for a further rebellion by the Jewish people. And so he had it destroyed 3 years later. But for 3 years, that was the only functioning Jewish temple in the world.
Sacrifice is still being offered.
Elephantine Island, there may well have been a Jewish temple there as well.
Where's that exactly?
Point.
Like that's
it's
never been there.
It's an island in the stream. That's what we are. Somewhere in between. Anyway,
I caught that reference. Thank you.
Yeah.
My boss is grinning over here, so she clearly caught it as well.
Yeah. So there's basically we discovered on the island. We know there were some Jews at the time of the exile who went in that direction, who were there, and there is the remains of the foundation are there, and the foundation kind of matches the floor plan of Solomon's temple with something that could be a well of souls.
Oh, like in Indiana Jones.
There is sort of this anticipation that, well, this was probably, you can't prove it. I mean, if someone wants to say no, I mean, you can't prove it. But, and also part of what's poisoned the well on why people want to deny it is that it gets used in a lot of conspiracy theories about where the Ark of the Covenant ended up.
There's the well of souls thing.
Yeah. So they say like, oh, see, this proves they had the Ark of the Covenant with them when they went to Egypt, right? So anytime something like that gets used in conspiracy theories, scholars are prone to just deny the whole thing on principle, to not go there.
Jacob.
But also not.
Yes.
Just to point out that, like, definitely also after the dispersion and exile of the 10 tribes, you have, I mean, there's a whole mystery with regards to the Shinto religion and the similarities with Judaism, and they have a temple that's the size of the Solomon Temple, and they have an ark that they raise, and they all wear white, and they have phylacteries, and they say Esa, Esa, Esa. So, like, that's not an ideal, though. That's just pointing out, like, bifurcations, but not due to choice, due to persecution, and so, like, again, these are all defaults.
And the question becomes, yeah, people did it. That doesn't mean God approved of it.
Correct. So I'm saying, like, in Japan, they have no idea why they have in the Shinto palace a seven, not pronged, but the Sheva Kani menorah, and they don't understand why they have they use these words that they have no Hebrew words where they don't know where the source for it is, or why they have like a tashlich ceremony. Like, they have no idea why they're doing these things,
I've
but that's what they're
never
doing.
heard of this stuff, and every once in a while you come up with stuff that's like really, really edgy stuff. So
I recommend
don't
it. It's
know.
fascinating.
Okay, I'll once Yosef I trust Yosef.
Sure.
Yeah. You sometimes start talking about lost tribes in ways that make me go, aliens, you say?
No, not aliens, but the Lost Tribes is a whole beautiful discussion. Anyways, go on. My point is that even this, which is true, this temple that we have in Egypt, right? I'm saying that's not pointing as like, oh, like we decided that now it's okay.
Right. And the question becomes, what did God think of it? Even if we did decide, like, Israel has made mistakes before, of which we have had to repent. This happens. And so the fact that Jews may have done something is proof of very little. Yeah.
It's not sacrificial temple stuff, but non-sacrificial temple stuff in terms of the worship that went on in the temple.
Yeah, there's other things going on.
Was sort of adapted at Qumran because they had rejected the second temple as corrupt.
That's the Dead Sea Scrolls place, everybody.
Right. They had adapted some of the things. So, and then, right. So already you have people doing some of the temple stuff outside of the temple within Second Temple Judaism in some groups. And then conversely, we see in the book of Acts that Christians were still making animal sacrifices in the temple after Christ's ascension, including St. Paul and St. James.
I thought we agreed not to talk about that.
Oh, no, we've talked about it before.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, it's this weird lacuna, you know. It doesn't fit the paradigm that a lot of people have of these radical disjunctions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you actually see here again in worship is a continuity from Second Temple Judaism, that Christianity adapts some elements of temple worship in its worship, continues to use the temple until the temple is destroyed. When the temple is destroyed, they go on with their worship, which is basically synagogue worship plus some adapted temple worship elements.
And I mean, and there's some other big elements too that get adapted, like the structure of authority. It's almost the same. It's almost the same in early Christianity as
it gets translated differently.
Yeah.
In your Old Testament and New Testament.
And when he says that, that's literally the case. it's literal translation differences, but the words, like if you read the Old Testament in its Greek translation and you read the New Testament in Greek.
Yes. Apparently we're really pausing because while we're pausing for Chazi, we can't apparently hear him. So I'm going back to the thing until we hear Chazi again.
You'll see the same words getting used.
Right. So when ecclesia is church in the New Testament and assembly in the Old Testament.
Right. Whereas like in the Greek Old Testament, ecclesia refers to the people of Israel, and ecclesia is used in the New Testament refer to the church, but they're just using the same word.
The same word or for the same group of people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But same thing with, right, you have the elders of the people, the elders of Israel in the Old Testament, and you have presbyters,
which are not like
the same word.
It's not like they're not analogous to the Sanhedrin. They are the Sanhedrin of the church. Yeah.
Right. And you have the shepherds of Israel.
I mean, dude, that means you and I are Sanhedrin.
As you have the episcopi, you have the bishops, right? There's this direct.
Except there's way more than 71 presbyters, which makes no sense with bishops. And I'm still trying to understand how exactly Christians ended up with bishops.
That's what I was going to ask about when he talks about like sort of that, like that system.
So as best as I have been able to figure it out, in the sectarian documents of Qumran, there is a mevaker, and I think mevaker is what ended up being bishop. And so this is my own personal theory. So like it has no standing whatsoever, but I think that Christianity had a certain structure which involved Jews being over Gentiles. And then when they got rid of the Gentiles, the Jews, because of the Jewish-Roman wars, a completely Gentile church was kind of like a beheaded Gentile church. I think originally in Christianity, the Eucharist was only like the priests were all Jews. I think so. And I think there was this role of mevaker, which was like the Qumran mevaker, which was the bishop. And then what happened was all of the Jews got thrown out or killed, and they ended up making up their own thing around what was left from that. That's my theory.
Just a point on that theory, which is one. My first comment is, it sounds curious to me that like they would get Levites or priests to join, because like those are people that are usually, let's say, more embedded within, let's say the mother religion, so to speak, right? So like to have them detract it would probably be less common, but I could be wrong about that. That's literally just like a guess. Secondly, however, we already see inside the Bible, right? When they go to Menashe, they use this Levite to try to have him act as a priest. So we could see where there was attempts to do this, and ultimately, whether it's Zechariah or Isaiah, I can't remember, when it talks about that God will also select priests and Levites from the Gentiles. Hopefully that could be a rectification eventually, where even in Christianity, again, this we're zooming to like the future right now for like the Noahide movement, that even the bishops and the priests, ultimately, they too will find a new status within their new Noahide manifestation of their religion. Please God.
We'll see what happens. And it's definitely difficult to reconstruct what happened thousands of years ago. If I remember correctly, the sectarian documents from Qumran have like they have like this 13-person structure of like 3 Kohanim and 3 Leviim and
you're right,
something like that. I don't remember exactly, but there were definitely, especially I think Kohanim, who were not welcome at the temple itself, who ended up making alternative structures. And it becomes a big question of like, okay, what happens to the people who claimed to be Kohanim, but they were not considered meyaches, etc. Like it's a whole question of various temple hierarchies, and let's face it, also charlatans going around claiming statuses that they may want despite not necessarily having a real claim to them, which does happen anytime you have a religious situation.
I was also going to say that his comment about that those groups were rejecting Second Temple Judaism, we should just put this in context, which the Talmud itself is rebuking the Second Temple period, right? Jesus is correct when he identifies the saturation of sinat chinam, of like what would be the term in English, of
baseless hatred.
Baseless hatred, and hence his focus on love. Ironically, we see where that love took us But I'm saying the Talmud itself is very aware of this tension, and there are tensions within Judaism at that point because of this baseless hatred that is rampant at that stage. So like I'm saying, it's not. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
There definitely was people who were not happy with the Second Temple administration, including like the Pharisees. So,
including God himself, right? I'm saying the door never closed, the prophecy stops. So, yes.
Trey, who let you into my channel?
Hey, Trey.
Hey, Ezzy. Great to see you. Glad you're doing well. Hope you're doing well.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. Amen. Amen.
Did you have something specific you wanted to talk about, Trey?
I'm just here to be the voice of reason. You know, did you see the comment that was posted under your video?
Which video?
The one about you talking about the Young Turks.
Oh, Anna Kasparian? Did you actually watch the video before you commented?
Yeah, I did. But did you check out the comment?
I have not seen the comments yet on that. I guess I could, although that's a whole different stream.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know. I had comments about that too, but that's a different stream.
Oh, okay. So now is this a new Jacob, or we're actually being consistent and staying on topic? I don't think I've ever.
Whoa, shots fired over here.
Are you Shinobi Shaman? Because I only see 2 comments from Shinobi Shaman.
I didn't comment. I'm just saying you should recognize Shinobi Shaman's words. He seems like a very informed person and not a crazy maniac.
Really? He seems like a crazy maniac to me. Yeah, it looks like a crazy maniac to me, so I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, okay. Where were we? I am only going to
continue with the video now.
Minutes. Yeah, I am only going to continue another 25 minutes. If people really want continued commentary, but like
right. So these authority structures are fundamentally the same in both, right? And so this is a point of continuity between Second Temple Judaism and Christianity.
Yep.
And then you have the ritual life in the calendar.
Yep.
Right.
Many of the same feasts.
Where the calendar the original Christian calendar is just brought over from Judaism.
Yep.
Right.
With both layers. The
apostles going to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, but what they're celebrating is the resurrection of Christ.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And same thing with Pentecost, same thing with, and then over time, distinctly Christian feasts get added. Right. Like the martyrdom of St. Stephen is probably the first one. And then Theophany is probably the second one, and so on. Right. And so now you might look at the Jewish calendar, the Christian calendar, and say, oh, these are kind of far apart. I see the connections, but you have to go back to the 1st century, right? And do the comparison there, right? And that's where you see this continuity. So we just described, and we've given this as an example, right? There is, right, a form of Second Temple Judaism that becomes known as Christianity, first at Antioch. And it has continuity with the Second Temple Judaism that came before and ancient Israelite religion, even though if you look at, like, you come to a divine liturgy and you go in your time machine back to the tabernacle in the wilderness, the 2 things you see are not going to be identical. There's going to be a lot less blood at my parish this Sunday, for example.
Not like last Sunday, or just kidding.
But Jacob, ultimately,
right? But there's
ultimately, I mean, this continuity thing is really the crux is, do you see the interpretation and rereading of Jesus back into the Bible as continuity or not? Right? Because that's ultimately what we're talking about. Because if you want to see this as, like, yes, those incremental changes, we have them in Judaism as well. However, we stick to the Masorah. Now, if they're not sticking to a Masorah, they're just saying there's a paradigm shift. And so that's one of the reasons of the skip. But now that we read Jesus back into the text, so it's still continuous, right? So like coming back and celebrating, not celebrating Passover, but celebrating the resurrection, then, at that point, that's something completely new. Now you see that as continuous, obviously, or you see that as fully manifest of the Passover lamb. But obviously, that's not. I mean, isn't that ultimately the point of disagreement?
Look, ultimately, I mean, let's say he wants to say that. What do you do with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?
Okay, so that's a different critique, which is like even if you want to play that, even if you want to do that, Father Stephen, then be consistent on like taking back on the traditions that are still relevant.
Right. Like this is a story which Christians kind of sort of want to tell themselves, but the fact is, like, I'm sorry, they never took the Torah as seriously as the Jews have. We've always taken it completely seriously.
So this is where the controversial thing I was going to say, I'll attempt it now, which is even if you want to go down the line, which is extremely controversial, which is Jesus is resurrected. Does come back, but that's only because that is needed for the Gentiles to make sure that Christianity, because up until that point, it's not sticking. And after that point, after that miracle, the apostles, that is enough to jumpstart it in a real sense where it takes off. And according to this understanding, that itself is through divine. I mean, that's a miracle that happens, like we had with Elijah or with Elisha, right? That's not unheard of, and it happens because we need to make sure that the rest of the world, the Western world, all the Christians take this very seriously. And in that sense, it's continuity in the sense where this is the Maimonides says, this is a path maker for the Messiah and needed for the Gentiles. So in that sense, there's a continuity. I would argue, like you, that even if you wanted to agree with that, you should still take on then. Even Christians should still try to manifest more of what it originally looked like if they now can.
And that's ultimately the problem. Ultimately the problem is like if you're an Acts 15 church, and I asked this on Twitter, I'm like, hey, look at Acts 15, right? It says Moses is read every week in the whatever you want to call it, synagogues or whatever you want to call it, right? If you want to say it's the ecclesia and we're the same ecclesia as Acts 15, well, why isn't Moses read every week? It's not. Right? And then I had somebody on Twitter say, well, Moses and the prophets are read every day in churches. And it's like, first of all, Acts 15 doesn't say and the prophets, it says Moses. And like, yeah, you guys, like, I'm sorry, you kind of jettisoned Moses, and I date that to Paul of Tarsus, right? And I think, like, I love the fact that that Father Stephen is trying to make it sound like Paul didn't hate Moses. And I hope he does convince Christians that they shouldn't hate Moses. But I look at the hatred of Moses that has been engendered in Christianity to the point where Justinian's code, as far as we know, made it illegal to recite Deuteronomy 6:4, right? Like the Shema was illegal. And here's an early Christian prince. Like, that's not Martin Luther doing that. That's Justinian doing that, right? So, like, I love this idea of continuity, and I want you to certainly value it. At the same time, I hope it's clear where I view you end up being if that's what you do.
Well, like you said about Father Stephen the Young, it's I would say we as Jews can accept the continuity as long as the work continues. So, like, what Father, as it was Father Stephen the Young right now, he is, as a Christian, participating in reorientation of that continuity. So, like, you could say that over the years, there has been detours and corruptions, but as long as it's lishma, or if it's for heaven's sake, then it could be continuous as long as you see people are honestly seeking and trying to do the best they can to understand. Now, I would say that is in some sense, the whole movement of Paul within Judaism, which I mean, isn't that also why you have this great interest in it and your relationship with Father Stephen Dion?
Yeah, I love Paul within Judaism. I want Christians to continue Paul within Judaism. I have to be honest. I think the end of that road is precisely what Christians call Judaizing, because once you go far enough in Paul within Judaism, you realize you don't need Paul, and you don't really even need Jesus anymore.
Well, but isn't that the exact? I mean, ironically, on the Shema Israel, Rashi on Hero Israel says it's a mission statement. It's not it's not the claim of a monotheist necessarily, which it says the God the one God that's our God will one day be the God of all the nations. So this is the process, and I'm saying for the Trinity to return back to one. That is, like you said, if that's the end of the line, then we are participating in a certain sense in seeing that happen. And part of that includes Jews participating in that conversation to help as best we can to explain the jargon, to translate, and to learn more about each other and them.
Look, you're preaching the Jewish gospel. I don't know if Christians.
That's true. Sorry. We're not evangelizing. Do your thing.
Yeah, like ultimately, when are Christians going to recognize? Yeah, I don't even know what to say. Like,
This guy's got a question.
What question do you have, my dear Goy?
Okay, time for Goy question. Isn't Acts 15 more of a Protestant view rather than, I would say, like either Orthodox or Catholic?
The Orthodox and the Catholic claim it to be Acts 15 to be the first ecumenical council.
Right, but it doesn't mean that we're trying to get back to Acts 15, right? Like that wouldn't be the Orthodox view.
I mean, I guess I don't know, but like they do view the Council of Jerusalem. Like, yeah, Protestants have a much harder time when I say, hey, look, in Acts 15, it says you should read Moses every week. And like, you don't.
But you should also fast on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right?
That's the Didache.
But it was at least that the reason they were doing it is because Jews were also doing it at the same time.
No, the Didache actually says not to do it like the Jews. We fast on Mondays and Thursdays.
Right.
Yeah, so they do it on Wednesdays and Fridays, I think.
But do modern Jews follow that same fasting rule?
Yeah, I mean there's fewer and fewer, but yeah, no, it like Bahab and Shovavim, they're pious, very, very pious Jews do fast on Mondays and Thursdays in certain months of the year. Yes. What?
And those fasts also, they're not. Some of them are half-day fasts. There's also different versions of how those fasts actually manifest with some people.
The practice of having fasts, including especially on Mondays and Thursdays, has continued in Judaism. Yes.
Right, but like so what if somebody said to you, I think that we should all get back to how God really meant it, and we should just follow what Noah said, and that's including the Jews, because in reality, we want to get back to how it really was by just following.
Hold on, we believe as Jews we have to keep the covenant of Noah.
No, I'm saying that ignore all the 616 laws. They said like, no, we should really get back to it because that's the fullest and completest.
No, that's a complete misunderstanding. Like, we're not saying you can't, like, God can't reveal things. But first of all, I mean, this is the centrality of Sinai, and that's why
you become a people at Sinai.
Yeah, ultimately, like what Christians say happened with Jesus right? Which is all of history revolves around Jesus, we would say, no, that happened at Sinai. All of history revolves around Sinai.
That's why trade. That's ultimately in the meta modern conversation. That's my red line, which is Sinai. Like you could talk to me about metaphor, allegory, things like that. He wrote this book. Moses didn't write that book. There is revelation at Sinai to the people. If there's no revelation, then it's a bust. Then all the conversation. And that's also why in Judaism, like the switch that Christians did, that the word becomes flesh, makes the word pointless at that point, and then revelation loses its status. And that's why there's another big.
Oh, you gone?
I'm not sure you're understanding what we're saying, Trey.
No, I am. I'm very confused because like the same. I just like the Orthodox would probably say the same thing, that there is a sort of unfolding of revelation.
But it's look, yeah. I mean, part of the reason I'm doing this commentary is because in many ways I agree with Father Stephen. It's just looking at those principles, I would say it becomes obvious which community actually took them seriously always, whereas Christianity, like at the very least, Christians have to be like, well, I would say Eastern Orthodox Christians have to, at the very least, say, oh, well, the vast majority of Christians fell into apostasy, which, I mean, as Eastern Orthodox, you basically are saying that. You're saying the Catholic Church has fallen into apostasy. That's the vast majority of Christians. And if that's true, again, I go back to, then Jesus wasn't the Messiah.
No, that isn't a good argument. That's
Why
a
is that
kind of
not a
dumb
good argument?
Because then I think that's like what the person's commented said. Even though it was a dumb comment, he mentioned that there was like basically records of basically a very large Jewish segment within like 5 BCE that were polytheists and they were eating pork during that time and writing back and forth to Jerusalem.
No. That's that. So this is the thing. We, like, within Judaism, we say it is it is the fact that we survived which shows, like, yes, historically there have been plenty of Jews who have fallen away. That's like our interpretation, Chumashim alu mitzrayim, that only a fifth of the Jews out of Egypt survived, that came out of Egypt survived. But like we believe there is a continuous community of Israel which has survived.
Well, specifically the Judean component, and that's why we're called Jews and not Israelites, because like the 10 tribes were dispersed. That's a whole other topic. And the like Jacob says, like we are Sherita Plita, the remnants of the remnants. But we believe that group has maintained the tradition.
And I mean, I've said this before, like, I don't claim to Christians, like, if a Christian says you're not Jewish, I'm like, okay, like, you can believe that. That's up to you, right? I am a part of the community that basically the entire world, like, recognizes. Like, how do you know that the Jews are the Jews and not the Black Hebrew Israelites? Like, I don't expect, I don't want you to expect me to like defend that. I won't. Like, if you don't think I'm the Jew, that's up to you, and that's between you and God. But like, it's everybody else. It's all the Christians who keep on saying, Jacob, you're so Jewish. Like, I don't go say to Christians, hey, am I Jewish or not? Like, that's not a question I have for Christians. And if they don't believe I'm Jewish, I'm like, okay, have fun with that. Because that's like, and if somebody wants to say that they are Jewish, I have always said, good luck with that. I hope it works out for you. The only warning I have is like it's it's not something you want to claim. Like being God's chosen people, like we say, like the joke is, God, couldn't you have chosen somebody else? Right? It's like that's not the type of chosen that some people seem to think we believe we are.
I'm just a little bit confused on that. So how do you understand that because the Messiah uh, came as a, I don't know, what is it, Ben Yosef or whatever, right? Like that there would be, no strife, or that there would be no like heretics.
When Mashiach ben David comes,
Right.
when the Davidic Messiah comes, there will be, like, as Isaiah says, the world, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as waters cover the
Waters
sea.
covers the sea.
Yeah, I'm talking about
Right.
Messiah Ben Yosef, the other guy.
Mashiach ben Yosef. I mean, that's a like that's a whole other thing that's kind of minor. Like whether or not Mashiach ben Yosef has come, I personally believe that Christianity is an iteration of Mashiach ben Yosef.
Right.
But
There's
like,
many, but there could be many iterations of Mashiach ben Yosef, by the way. And
yeah,
just so you understand, Trey, there is periods when the rabbis were sure he was going to die, understanding the text. There's versions where we're told that it's an option that he could die or not, depending on how we interact. Then is Messiah, son of Joseph, is it a man? Is it a time period? Could it be multiple men? So these are, there's multiple levels of interpreting these things, and the same also with Messiah himself.
and
Right.
this is an important part of the difference between Christianity and Judaism, is like, if there's a prophecy and we don't know how it's going to be, it's like, okay, that's fine. I don't know. Like,
Okay.
we can say that. Christians lose their mind when you say, I don't know how this prophecy is going to be.
And we only know, Trey, in retrospect, right? This goes all the way back to Moses seeing God's face, seeing God's back and not God's face. So when Jacob says, like, how do I know, as far as like the prophecies and Judaism, and obviously Jacob and I will disagree with, let's say, the establishment of the state of Israel. Nevertheless, the continuity of the Jewish people, that I'm saying, those things in the context of prophecies that were told are mind-boggling, obviously.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just confused on Jacob's point about like there can't be Catholics and Protestants that exist if you're Orthodox. I'm just like really confused on that.
That's not what I said. What I said was the Orthodox believe that the Catholic Church has fallen into apostasy.
Yeah.
They also believe that Jesus came as the Messiah to establish the church.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. Like, when a majority of the people who believe in Jesus are apostates, like, how do you say that he's guiding your church? He's not doing it very well.
I'm so confused.
Why are you confused?
Like,
It's not like they believe that, like, the Bishop of Rome was not part of the church at one time. They do believe that the Bishop of Rome was in fact the leader of their church.
Yeah, let's get to the meat, because I'm just confused how these couldn't apply to you. Because I could just say, well, give it enough time, Jacob. Like, we'll see how long the Catholics
I
live.
don't
Maybe less
believe the
than the
Messiah
Orthodox.
has come yet.
No,
You don't understand the difference between someone.
Your whole Jewish argument is that basically it's the group that survives. And your argument
Okay.
about reform and conservative is that, well, I don't think they're going to survive.
Trey. But that is before the Messiah has come, not after the Messiah has come.
Messiah ben David, not
No,
Messiah ben
Mashiach,
Yosef.
yeah, Mashiach ben David. What else? Like, what are we talking about?
Why can't I just say, oh, Jesus is Messiah ben Yosef, blah blah blah.
You can, but like
By the way, you could
that's another thing that I keep
that
on
Trey,
pointing
and
out
there
to
are very
Christians. Chazi. That's another thing that I keep on pointing out to Christians. For thousands of years, they said that Jews came up with this idea of Mashiach ben Yosef to dismiss Jesus, right? And in a sense, like you could say it does, because if Jesus is Mashiach ben Yosef, then obviously he's not Mashiach ben David. These are two completely different concepts.
again, Trey, like after we have arguments, even Jacob out that Mashiach ben David. Nevertheless, if you still wanted to even see continuity there and include JC inside, Mashiach ben Yosef is known as the foundation of David's chair, right? So these are things that are connected with each other. They go together. It's a pairing. So you could say that they are both one in a certain sense, but there is nevertheless there still is a separation between them. Whether you want to call it, well, we don't have to go into the exact terms, but I'm just saying they are connected from a spiritual sense.
Like, I mean, ultimately, I don't understand how Christians can make the claim that now they're suddenly happy about the idea of Mashiach ben Yosef, when for thousands of years they were like, no, this is a lie that Jews came up with in order to explain away Jesus.
Just like Maimonides was like, Christianity and Islam are actually, ways of God acting in the world, when for thousands of years most Jews did not like Christianity, thought it was a heresy, didn't think there was anything good with it, thought it was blasphemous, God on a stick, blah blah blah.
No, see, that's the thing. I don't think that Maimonides was saying anything that was I like that is, I think, your misunderstanding of what Judaism taught. Are there segments of the Talmud which can be interpreted the way you're thinking? There are segments which could be interpreted that way. I don't think there's any proof whatsoever. I really don't. And if I thought Judaism actually taught that, like, Jesus, like, was the like that doesn't even make sense from a Jewish point of view, to view the existence of Christianity as the type of tragedy that Christians view so much of Judaism as. Like, I don't think you're switching frames when you look at the various different things that we're talking about. Like, you're not switching references. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm trying to, yeah.
So, like, when we talk about Judaism, like, there's a Jewish frame, which is there's one God, everything good and evil comes from this one God, right? The Messiah hasn't come yet. The world is in a state of imperfection, right? And when we're talking about Christian ideas, there are lots of other ideas which are completely different, and you keep on switching one from one to the other, and it's like they don't work.
Well, you're kind of like putting out a bunch of points, and I'm trying to like pick at least the important ones out of them.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
but you
Trey,
keep
what
on
Jacob
moving
is
them
trying.
from one context to the other.
But to be fair, Jacob, we are saying a lot of things over here. But Trey, obviously, what Jacob is stressing is that, and definitely when he's talking also to me about it, it's within the Jewish context. I think what he's trying to stress is that maybe for your questions, you need to be more specific about even using certain terms like Messiah, son of Joseph, right? If you want to have a conversation with Jacob, it sort of needs to be translated within the Jewish context how it sees it. So, like I said this to Jacob once, like as far as the Orthodox rabbis, the most you're going to get, the most controversial option is that Jesus was the potential of maybe being a Messiah, son of Joseph, but it didn't work out because for X reasons. But just like taking a concept and cutting and pasting it is like where I think there's like a misunderstanding over here. So if you have a specific question, I guess just there first has to be like a little breakdown of what the concept means in Judaism, and then we could then lay it onto the conversation.
I assume that was
Yeah.
for you.
What?
I assume that was for you.
No, he was talking to you.
You said the context in between them. That's what I understood.
Um,
So, can I at least put this for you? Like,
sure.
there's the idea of God's right hand and God's left hand, right?
Okay.
That- why couldn't it just been Jews for 1,000 years until Maimonides believed Islam and Christianity were God's evil hand?
Um, Maimonides, in a sense, kind of is talking about, well, not God's evil hand, but God's left hand. I mean, I still believe Christianity is God's left hand.
Like God putting evil into the world?
In a sense, yeah. I mean, what? Do you think the Crusades were good? Do you think Jesus being killed was good?
If you're a Christian, you think it's good.
You should talk to some Christians about that. It's a difficult place, which is part of the reason the JWs were like, yeah, there Jesus, like they don't actually do the cross thing, and they don't like, because it's like Christianity has a lot of problems making
That's
its story cohere.
No, the JWs don't do the cross because they have problems with Greek influences, and they want a completely Jewish religion, not a Greek and Jewish religion.
Okay, but they still don't do pictures of the cross.
No, they do.
What do you mean? They okay? I mean, you know them a lot better than I do, but
You can look in the book. There's like they do the memorial every year. That's like the biggest holiday they have is meditating deeply on the cross and pretty much like celebrating the cross and talking about it.
okay. Most Christians, I think, would say that that the crucifixion was a bad thing.
Which Christians?
I know Sam Titteman very much so thinks that the cross was a bad thing. I think most Christians, I really do think if you ask most Christians, they would say the fact Jesus was crucified was a bad thing.
I'd be interested to hear his theology on understanding like the wage of sin pays death and how like what is his redemption theology,
He believes in
Sam?
PSA.
Then he thinks the cross is good.
Talk to him about it.
I don't know. Because like I'm the only like Unitarian that could give him any pushback, so I'd be
You can talk to him about it, Trey.
okay.
Okay.
I've just never met these people, but you know.
I'm telling you, he thinks it was he thinks it was bad. Okay, I am going to end this broadcast because it's 12 o'clock and I have to do stuff and we have to do stuff. Are you coming tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. I am ending the stream.